You're listening to Your Best Life, powered by MercyOne. Join us as we have a fun conversation with certified experts and physicians about health topics for you and your family. It's Your Best Life, our one purpose.
We got itchy noses, watery eyes, scratchy throat, hard time sleeping. Sherry, does that sound familiar to you or anybody you know?
That sounds like my son, who has bad allergies.
Allergies. And with that in mind, that's why we're talking to board-certified allergist Dr. Dan Dalan today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So you guys, we actually were just talking before we actually hit record. Sherry,
Yeah, well, let me get right into this. I said I was so excited to have you on today just because it is allergy season. Well, it seems like it's always allergy season at my house, but it is, peak or it's starting to be peak season, I believe,
spring.
for allergies. Spring is pretty bad. So I have a lot of questions for you today. I hope that maybe you can answer for a lot of our listeners and myself. First off, how do you know if you have allergies or if you have a cold?
Allergies last longer. Colds goes away within a few days.
So what are some, besides the sniffling and sneezing, what are some things you can do for your allergies that can help alleviate all that stuffiness?
Well, it's nice to know what you're allergic to, first of all, because the best way to treat an allergy is to avoid it. And so it's hard to avoid something that you don't know. And most of the things that you're allergic to are like microscopic or invisible. You can't see it. And so it's like trying to fight somebody you can't see. Mm-hmm. It's good to know what you're up against.
Are you born with allergies, or do you get allergies? I mean, with my son, it seemed like he was born with a lot of allergies because right away he seemed to always have colds growing up. And when he was around dogs or animal dander, it seemed like he'd get the sniffles a lot sooner. If he was outside by a lot of pollen, he'd get the wheezing going on. So to me, I always thought you were born with allergies, but is it something that you accrue as you get older?
It's two parts to it. The genetics part is permanent, like you're talking about. And then being lucky or unlucky with the environmental exposure that you're talking about. And that changes all the time, and then your body changes. So there's two parts to it. But my joke is people ask me all the time, Dr. Dalan, how can you prevent allergies from occurring when moms and kids like you show up in my clinic? And I jokingly say, well, you got to choose your parents properly. It's too late. But the key there is the genetics part, and that's the part that that predisposes you to that. And chances are you will get allergies, and then throughout your life. And if you become a mailman or a lawn worker, or you're going to be inside most of the time, your probability of getting allergies depends then on exposure.
So let's talk a little bit about spring allergies, and then we can get into some other of the hot ones a little later on. But, we're sitting down to record this late March, early April. Spring is here. Flowers are in bloom, things like that. So
take it away, Adam.
Yeah, pollen's a thing. Talk a little bit about the common things that are causing some of that suffering for a lot of people right now.
Even in February, when we had that cold spell, et cetera, and then the melting of the snow, the trees are programmed already, and they're alive. And so the right circumstances of wind and temperature, et cetera, even before the leaves come out, the pollens are out there already. And I had my pollen counter out there in February, and I was seeing them already in the hundreds and then thousands. And so that's just how trees and plants reproduce. They spew out all the pollens, and we can't see them. But typically, this time of the year, there's different trees that come out. First ones I was seeing was like alder, and then elm. Pretty soon, I'm going to start seeing a lot of other ones, and typically it'll be oak and mulberry. Anyways, it's there's a whole slew of them.
And some people are just more sensitive than others then.
That's correct.
Okay.
So it depends on your exposure level, et cetera. Don't cut down your tree, by the way, because all those pollens that are coming out are from miles away. So people ask me that all the time. Well, should I cut my tree down, in my backyard? Wow, they're being blown all over the place.
Sure.
You mentioned temperature has a lot to do with it. So obviously, like Adam started singing to us, the trees are in bloom, the flowers are starting to bloom. But with that, if you have someone that has a lot of allergies, or if you're someone that has a lot of allergies, is it better to live in hot, humid places or cold places, or so you don't have that cycle of spring to winter to spring to summer to fall to winter, or is it the same for anybody?
It's the same for anybody. So the genetics is always going to be there, and then the plant life is what's going to determine it. And so in the desert versus in the jungle versus the Midwest, there's different types of plants. A funny related story with that is that a lot of the Midwest people go Southwest for when they retire, right? Snowbirds. And so they start building their homes down there in the Southwest, and they didn't have certain plants that they have here in Iowa, and they started planting them down there. And so their allergies followed them wherever they went. And this was in the, early in the 20s and 30s. And so there was restrictions then that came about in planting different trees in the Southwest and Arizona, because they were bringing down bringing the trees from Iowa that they were allergic to, and then people down there became allergic. So that point shows you where the uniqueness of the plant is important in the environment.
Mm-hmm. And all fun and games. Everybody's probably had an allergy and they don't even know it. I think seems like, how many people have allergies?
I tend to get sniffly about this time every
too.
year. I don't consider myself allergic, but
Right.
I just feel like, probably some sensitivity to it. But
Me too. And you say, you should have picked better parents. I heard that same thing when my son got tested, and I didn't even know I had allergies, nor did my husband at that time. So that's, we just played it off as, it's colds or, something like that.
My favorite saying in the clinic is, how bad is it to do anything about? About 20% of the population have allergies or hay fever, and some of them don't know it, and some of them do, and they don't mind or they don't care. They're not bothered by a sniffling or sneezing or itching or a runny nose. It just depends on your tolerance and how much you can accept or do, or need to do, and so it's personalized medicine is what it comes down to.
So I think we've kind of been talking about our experiences where it's something that we might not notice. That's certainly not true for everybody. So how bad can it get for some people that they might need to seek some medical relief?
Oh, it can get really bad. It's inflammation. You've heard of COVID reactions. Our own immune system is part of the problem, and it's over protecting us. And that's what happens with allergies. Our body is just really, really revved up. And it can get back into the sinuses. It can become a exacerbation of asthma. It can get hives all over the place, and some very rare anaphylactic or acute emergency reaction can occur. And so it's a whole slew of possibilities. For the most part, it is mild and intermittent, but it depends on your genetics and your environment.
Well, you had mentioned that there are kind of three. We have 4 seasons, obviously, but there's kind of 3 seasons when it comes to pollen. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, tree pollens come out right now, and then grass pollens come out pretty much May for a couple months. When the grass blades, when your neighbors don't cut their grass for a couple of weeks, it seeds out, and that's the pollen, and that's the majority of the things that people are allergic to in the summer. So May, June, July, and then late August, etc. Weeds, especially ragweed, comes out. Then it gets mixed in with the harvesting that goes on around here, and so those are the 3 plant seasons that can come out and bother people. But in the wintertime, if there's any good things about our Iowa winters, the snow will cover up the pollens out there, but everybody goes in and you can be allergic to things inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're telling us, these different spores and mold, the grass pollens and the flower pollens and the tree pollens, and it's like everything you say is like my son. Everything is, and I can follow it, like following the seasons. Like April is the sneezing and sniffling from the trees, and like definitely he's allergic to grass. When he lays in the grass, a lot of times if it's long grass,
Yep.
he comes away with a rash off of his leg immediately walking away from a grass and itchy. So definitely I can almost visually see my son getting these things as you're talking about them.
The one thing I want to emphasize for the spring allergy, or the tree pollens, are a little bit bigger than the other pollens, and so most of the symptoms are in the eyes. And so try not to rub your eyes, etc., things like that. And really look up what pollens look like on the internet. I use my microscope because I can see it, but typically it's in the eyes and the nose more before it goes down lower in the lungs. But that's what I see in the spring allergies mostly are people with red eyes and itchy eyes, etc. And it's so easy. Everybody, I try to tell people, try not to rub your eyes. It's so easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good way to get into this next part. Let's talk about some of the things that people can do to find relief from pollen in the spring. And you mentioned the first one, don't rub your eyes. But what are some other things that people can do?
I joke about it all the time. Wear a spacesuit or live under a bubble. but ultimately, try to control your exposure level by just being mindful of what's going on. And we check the weather every day. If it's going to be really windy and dry out there, there's going to be a lot of pollens out there. And so try to minimize your time outside that when it peaks, and you can check that on the internet. But ideally, it's nice to have started your medicines, both antihistamines and nasal steroids, at least several weeks before the season starts. And the problem is we don't know when the season starts. But I typically tell people, once you start seeing and feeling the snow melting away, it could be February or March, start your medications ahead of time.
And so there's some over-the-counter medications you can get, but when is it time that I need to come see someone like you?
When things aren't enough. It's when you've been trying this for weeks or months or years, if it goes down into your lungs. It doesn't have to be a real serious, like a heart attack or a stroke and things like that. The quality of your life, you're being bothered at work. You can be present at work, but you might not be the best you can be. So if you have to miss work because you're sick, that's absenteeism. But there is the concept of presenteeism. You're present at work, but you're not the best person you can be because, you're sniffling and you got tons of handkerchiefs on you. That's a big deal for some people.
Besides, you talked a little bit about for our listeners, not touching your eyes, avoiding high pollen days outside. But let's say you have a kid who just is in a sporting event outside for baseball or whatever it may be, soccer, and they can't avoid being outside. What are some things they could do beyond that?
Especially for kids, allergy shots, because that can help halt the progression into other things like hives and eczema and asthma. And then if you're going to be outside all the time and it's hard for you to avoid the allergies, and you've already shown that you tried all those medications for weeks and months at a time, well, that is an ultimate, highly recommended ways of treating people. And you don't have to be a kid, but especially kids, so that you can prevent certain things from progressing like asthma. But allergy shots is the answer to your question. You
mentioned earlier that you have to know your opponent before you can really come up with the game plan, I guess, sporting an allergy
exactly.
there.
Yeah.
So how do you figure out what is ailing someone? Talk about that process.
Well, when people tell me that they sneeze more April 1st, springtime, that's a tree pollen. And when people tell me that they were on a football game in August and they started wheezing, that's ragweed, et cetera. So I have a clue. And then we validate that and prove it by doing the skin test on the back. And we check for Timothy grass and orchard pollen and oak and maple, et cetera. Then we know exactly what they are so that we can target situations or environment where we can minimize your exposure to them. And if we are going to do allergy shots, we need to know what to put in it. And so that's why allergy skin testing is the ultimate answer, to fight against your enemy. Then at least you can do something about it. You might not be able to see them, but you can guess where they are.
You mentioned something before. You said allergies and hay fever. What is hay fever?
That's the old name for allergies, because back then they couldn't see pollens, like late 1800s, and they didn't know any better to use a microscope. And so they were pretty smart doctors and nurses back then. They got it pretty close to hay and grass, and they started sneezing right next to the bales of hay and right next to a rose plant. So they were calling it rose fever or hay fever because they were sneezing, and they thought they had a cold or a virus. But that's the common name for hay fever. But they're actually reacting to in an allergic way things that are invisible to them. And that's why they came up with the name hay fever or rose fever.
So you talked a little bit about, Adam asked about what should we do next if it's not getting controlled by over the counter. Go see a physician that knows what they're talking about with the allergies. You get them on the right shot as they get older, or as someone gets older and they're on a certain allergy prescription. Will it change? Do they need to get rechecked? Is it something that they'll have forever, or how does allergies affect you as you age?
Well, just like any part of the human body or humans, we wear down a little bit. The allergies are still there, but not quite as bad as they used to be. For me, I've had allergy shots twice in my life, and I still use antihistamines or medications every once in a while, but not quite as much as I used to that I remember. And so you'll still have it to some degree as you age. And again, depending on your genetics, your exposure level, how much you're outside, will depend on the intensity of what you do for yourself. I've had people that don't do anything at all anymore. I mean, I don't see them. I'll just see them in the mall or in the restaurant. I said, Doc, I'm fine.
So talk real quick. I'm curious. I don't know this. Not that I know about many things that we talk about on this show. Just saying. But allergy shots. So is that something that somebody does like once a season or a couple times, like once a month? How often does somebody need a shot?
Yeah, I always talk about baby shots, 0, 3, 6, 9 months, and 11 months. You get a series of different type of shots. But allergy shots, we desensitize you and get you used to them. And it's a little more often than baby shots and things like that. And it's an investment in your time, effort, and money, and it works. But we give it to you a little bit at a time, once a week for the first 28 weeks, and then once a month for the next 5 years. I said that pretty fast, but we need to remind your body incrementally and in ways that's safe, and then that's effective, to enable you to do that. So it is an investment, but it's well worth the talk, with your allergy doctor to see if it fits for you.
Great.
And you build the medication that you're giving them shots on, so you're basically building their immune system towards a pollen? Is that what you're doing?
Yep.
So you're putting pollen into their body so it builds antibodies so they don't, am I understanding that?
That's exactly it.
Okay.
And it's the same way as any vaccines work. Okay, we're actually giving you stuff that bothers you, but we give it to you in a very small amount so that it doesn't cause you the problem. And then slowly build up your immunity to it and those antibodies, et cetera. And each time you see it, our body makes more and more of it, and then it does it in a controlled way.
So I'm going to throw this odd question out there because I've heard this. Fact or fiction? I've heard taking natural honey is good for allergies. Have you ever heard that before?
Oh, I've heard about it, yes, and people talk about it all the time. Homeopathic medications, if you think works for you, it works for you. Go ahead and do it. If it doesn't harm you, and most of it don't harm you, but it might harm you in the pocketbook, though. And so I always tell people, you know what? If you think it's working for you, I don't have any problems with it. But science shows that it's not medicinal or doesn't work in the body, in the ways that medicine does. But fact or fiction, true or false, depends on the question and the context of the question.
Yeah,
I sound like a politician.
Very diplomatic.
Yes. So I have another question, and I'm just thinking of my son again. So sorry, guys, but I know some listeners are out there are with me on the mamahood of this and trying to figure out if you have kids that have allergies, getting through it. And my son started very early in life with allergies. We got him tested, and his back lit up on the backside.
Yep.
Literally was everything from the outdoors to the indoors with dust mites. And and you think dust mites, and the first time I heard someone tell me he was allergic to dust mites, I was like, but I clean my house. But dust is everywhere. And so just trying to be able to control it. So some of the things that he has is the wheezing part. We talk about, the eyes and the sneezing, and that's the easy part for parents listening. But it does get a little scary when you have a young child who starts to wheeze a little bit. So is that something that the allergy shots can help with, or putting them on a prescription medicine can help with if they do get to that point?
Definitely, but we want to make sure that the lungs are under control first before we do that, and we ensure that that is the case. We do breathing tests, etc. We take all the necessary precautions before we start allergy shots on people with asthma, especially. But having said that, allergy shots is one of the best way to control asthma because the nose and lungs are connected to each other. It's one big tube. So whatever's happening in the nose affects what's going on down lower in the lungs. So the more you can treat the nose first before it goes down into the lungs, the better.
I have, I think any mom, dad out there listening that has a kid that has allergies knows the sounds of it going south. Knows the sounds of it goes from a sneeze to a cough to a wheeze to needs help. So no, I appreciate it because I've heard about the shots and I've went to, came to us as well for help with allergies, and we're on medicine, but I've never been told much about the shots. So I think this is really interesting. That's an avenue to look at.
What I want to say about that, what you just said, and about the whole session right now, is that what we do primarily, even though we've been talking about shots and medicines and technology, etc., what I would tell you and everyone and all that are listening is that knowledge management and knowledge acquisition and telling people what's going on and what the things we can do about it to prevent it from occurring in the first place is the most valuable things that we provide, and that's education. Like you said, we talked about earlier, trying to fight somebody you can't see, so knowledge and what to do, and not just necessarily a pill or an allergy shot. All those things we do, and all those things we prescribe. But then it's just like having a toolbox, and you're going to build a project. You got to know how to use your tools. And so we teach you how to use your tools. And we were talking about shots and avoidance measures and pills, when to use it and when to stop. So it's knowledge acquisition and management is one of the most important things we provide.
For the average typical person who has allergies come and go for them, and you mentioned depending on the season and depending on what they could be allergic to, would you recommend, prior to knowing that pollen's about ready to come and I am allergic to tree pollens, would you recommend them to start an antihistamine a couple weeks before that time, like a daily antihistamine, or just do it when it starts to come?
It's usually best to treat it early.
Okay.
A preventative strike, just like everything else, and that depends on the tree season. Now, for the fall, it's like clockwork. It peaks in the end of August, etc., first part of September. That means that you should be starting your medicine a month before that. So 2 to 4 weeks before it's going to be there. But how do you know it's going to be there is the big question. So I usually tell people, at least by April Fool's, you should be starting your allergy medicines. But this year, it came out early, so who knows? But it's never too late.
Yeah.
It's never too late.
Well, I mean, that's news to me because, I usually just take it when I start having the symptoms. So I'll try to be better about knowing the pollen counts.
I want to say thanks again to Dr. Dalan for spending some time with us today. If you've got anything that you've been suffering from as far as allergies, you can find Dr. Dalan or another allergist near you, and we'll put some more information in the episode description of how to do that. So thank you again, Dr. Dalan, for joining us.
Thank you.
So, hey guys, thank you for joining us today. It's Sherry and Adam, and you know that we love to hear from you. We love feedback. We want to hear everything that you like about the podcast, things you want to hear more of. You can fill that form on MercyOne.org/podcast.
Until then,
Live your best life.